All right, gaining weight. It's not a mystery. Like most of us have no issue gaining weight, but in bodybuilding, where there's a time and a place to, not just bodybuilding, but if you are a body recomp enthusiast, there is a time and place for the strategic gaining of body weight. So yeah, gaining body weight mindlessly anyone can do, but gaining body weight in a manner where it is conducive to not just putting on muscle, but also making it so that you don't have more work to do than what is actually needed on the other side when you start the fat loss phase. That is the big mystery, right? In fact, I'd say that for most bodybuilders, they actually get halfway decently competent at the fat loss side of things, which is technically harder, right? Like all things considered, than gaining weight the way I guess they want to. Would you guys agree with that?
It's always easy for me to gain weight, man. Too easy. Losing body fat's a lot harder for me. So for me personally, over the years, it's always been an issue of not gaining in excess. Because like you said, like when I go to start a prep or some type of long, extensive cut, I got way more to take off. And then, yeah, you might benefit from having that weight gain in the off season where it's like, okay, maybe you did pick up a little bit more muscle mass, potentially, because sometimes you can't force feed muscle. But on the way down, if you're not very strategic and very skilled at it, you're going to end up losing what you gained anyways. So oftentimes it's like we need to learn how to gain appropriately depending on the context, like who we are as bodybuilders. Are we beginner? Are we intermediate? Are we advanced? Are we young? Are we old? Even like life constraints too, like can play a role in how you kind of manipulate where you should be on a gaining phase. But my error, like in general, my error has always been gaining too much. And I think that's a byproduct of my genetics, but also habits or lack thereof. What about you, Dick?
I'm thinking of it in like physical difficulty gaining weight and also mental difficulty gaining weight. Like I think we're talking more about the mental aspect of it now. I think in our community, in our population, and our little niche of natural bodybuilding, we're probably the only ones that are having this conversation. Everyone else in the world is trying to find out how do we drop body fat.
Right.
But for us, most of us have to be pulled back, and not just in bodybuilding. A lot of us, in my own experience, we have this mindset of just working ourselves to the ground in order to feel good about ourselves or that we are accomplishing something. So I think the idea of gaining weight and gaining body fat after you've just gone through a contest prep, it could be difficult. As silly as it always amazes me how I still fall for the same feelings after all this time.
Why do you think that is?
Just
because you're seeing yourself so shredded, all that hard work, you don't want to lose it, or is it something else, or a plethora of things?
It sounds silly, right? Because I know better. I know that that it's ultimately helping the journey. I think in the past for me it was because the reasons why I got into bodybuilding, I think, have changed over the years. In the past, I would imagine that everyone in a room would look at me and say, oh, I guess he really let himself go. Or like, oh, I guess like that bodybuilding competition that I saw on Facebook, I guess that really like was a one and done type thing. Cause now like Nick probably doesn't even work out anymore.
I think we've all gotten that. Like, what happened to Jeff?
Yeah.
Look at those cheeks.
And as silly as it sounds, like that would be part of the reason why I wouldn't like to gain that much weight in the off season. Where now that's not even a thought in my mind what other people think. But there is still that idea that I am going to be with my daughters and they're going to see daddy in a t-shirt. And do I want them to see daddy with a gut? Or do I want daddy to be muscular every time of the year and still look different than other daddies, but not so much so where I look like I'm not in shape or not healthy. There are pictures year round with little kids in the house, and I don't want to look back and have my face really bloated in some pictures and like have a triple chin just because I'm quote unquote gaining for the next bodybuilding season. So for me, I've kind of come to terms with the comfortable amount of body fat for me to gain in the off season. And for me, this last season is probably about like 20-ish pounds from stage weight. That was comfortable for me. It wasn't work to keep. I wasn't force feeding myself. I wasn't starving myself. I was living. I looked good under my standards that I'm talking about. So yeah, I think over the years, it's definitely changed for me, the difficulty as to why. But at the end of the day, I think losing the shreds always hurts a little bit, even if you plan for that photo shoot right after your show. And that, to be honest with you, that has been something that's been easier. That's eased my transition into the off season. I scheduled the photo shoot after my previous 2 preps, and it's just a way to because sometimes the stage shots aren't the best shots. And having that personalized photo shoot with that lighting and hit me with every kind of camera angle you got, get the special lights that look like umbrellas, make me look like I came off a cover of a magazine. Let's just get these pictures, keep them forever, and now let's go into the off season, get ready for next time. So I think having that checkpoint for me really helped with everything too, to kind of let the shreds peacefully go.
What about you, Bert? In your early years, you had some pretty big off seasons.
Yeah, I did. It's crazy because when I started, it was done pretty well. Because who needs to bulk? It's something I guess it should be brought up. If you're a noob and you're of average body weight, you probably don't need to bulk. You will legitimately probably drop body fat and gain muscle at the same time. Someone
that's
who
kind of
is,
like my high school years. I didn't really do any legit bulking. I remember just eating mom's cooking and training, but I had an average level of body fat. I wasn't super lean. I wasn't too big either as far as too much body fat. And I just sprouted. Once I put some good intention on my training, I just sprouted without really having to think about gaining or losing or any of that.
I mean, it makes sense. It's why we tell our friends that they're not into this when they want to start going to the gym, and they're like, well, 80% of their thinking is in their diet and how they're going to approach that. And it's you know what? If you really are serious about this gym thing, if you just train for a year consistently, go to the gym 3 times a week, consistently, just show up on the days that you don't want to go. It will amount to something that I can't even begin to explain to you, because you will not believe me. You will think I am giving you one of those, fitness world false promises. But it's quite insane what lifting weights, someone who's never lifted weights before, what it's going to do for their body comp.
That's what happened to
my mother lose
your
10
mom,
years.
exactly.
Yeah, 10 years off. I was you look 10 years younger from lifting weights seriously for a year. So not everyone needs to bulk. You just need to lift weights.
Thinking back to when I started out, Jeff, kind of like you mentioned there, I never had that in me to be the biggest person in the room. I always gravitated more toward the most cut guy in the room. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's because I was one of the I had abs since I hit puberty. I always just had them. And I would watch a movie like Rocky and I would want to be like Sylvester Stallone, not Ivan Drago.
Rocky 3, right?
Yeah,
Rocky 3, not Rocky 2, Rocky 3.
Rocky 3 and 4. Yeah,
There
that's
you
when.
go.
That's
Okay,
when. That's
we got to
when
make sure that's straight, because Rocky 1 and 2, it's like,
he's got
Rocky
a bit of a
needed to
dad
train.
bod.
You
Yeah.
need to lift some weight still. Yeah.
But yeah, I always gravitated more toward that look. I never looked at Arnold and wanted to look like Arnold. I never looked at Ronnie Coleman and wanted to look like Ronnie Coleman. But you show me Sylvester Stallone, Frank Zane, these kind of physiques, and I always gravitated toward that. So I think that carries over to when I got out of my teens and got into bodybuilding. That's why I had more of an issue, I think, in my off seasons, because I always identified myself as that. I never wanted to be the biggest guy in the room. I never was striving for that kind of thing. I liked the idea that I looked a certain way, but then when I took my shirt off, it was like, whoa, that's under that. Like, I kind of always gravitated more toward that look. So I wonder what that is, why I was drawn more to those physiques early on. If it was like a chicken or egg type thing, like, was that I realized I was never genetically going to be the biggest person in the room, and then I kind of came to terms with that and went down that path? Or is it just something like, I don't know, like maybe like a genetic mindset type thing? But yeah, did you guys ever, like, did you feel that? Like, who did you guys want to, like, did you have guys that you respected and liked, like Arnold and Dolph Lundgren, but didn't want to look like them? And then you had this other group of guys that you always wanted to look like, and does that correlate to your guys' like ability to gain weight in an off season?
My first experience training was in '86 in my bedroom with plastic weights. And I had one magazine, and I cut the picture out of Lee Haney, and I put him on my wall. And I knew back then, like, that wasn't realistic. I'm like, that's just light years ahead of me. But it was more inspiring. Like, I wanted to look muscular. I was lifting weights like I wanted to look muscular, but not so much like, hey, I'm going to follow the paths of a Lee Haney. It wasn't until, like, the biggest influence was when I was in my early 20s. I met a guy from the gym who was into Mincer and Yates HIIT training. And it was basically just train hard, eat big. Got to get big, bro. Like, so that was kind of the biggest influence. But prior to that, I was kind of like you. I was looking at Sylvester Stallone in Rambo. I even had a mullet because I got to look like that, man. That's just cool to look jacked, shredded. And that was kind of my body style through high school. It's like I wasn't paying attention to trying to gain weight, but I was lifting with intention. Like, I just had a passion to lift hard and heavy. And thankfully, I was fueled enough just, because of mom's cooking. I wasn't in a deficit, but I wasn't really in a surplus either. Like, my body weight in high school, like my freshman, sophomore year, was like 155, 165. And it basically stayed the same throughout the entirety of high school. I think when I graduated, I was about 165, 167. But I looked drastically different, like way more muscular. And the level of leanness was probably about the same. But it was just straight up, a lot of it was just muscle. And it wasn't until I met the guy at the gym where like, hey, eat big. And all of a sudden I'm eating big, gained weight, but I got softer. And then it was like I got to 190 pounds and still looked like a good off-season bodybuilder. But then it was like, well, 200 might be better than 190. Then I got fixated on a number. And when you get fixated on a number, as we know, that can skew you in the wrong direction. So I went up to 200 pounds, like force feeding. I just got softer. I didn't get any bigger, like from a muscular standpoint. And it was actually counterproductive to gain that weight. But it was a lesson learned. And now when I get a little too heavy, usually the indication of me not, like, it's not a good, not so much the look. Like, yeah, it doesn't look as favorable when I'm softer. But when I'm out of breath going up a flight of stairs, like, then I know, like, okay, this shit is not where I need to be. This is not helping my overall health. And I want to feel like I'm an athlete. And I think sometimes in the off-season, like, we try to force feed a little too much because we're eager to get those gains. And again, if you're just like in a place where your overall health is a little at risk, it's not worth it.
Well, I've messed up the bulking like worse than but, everyone here combined at some
250?
point.
Or 250 or
250 with clothes on, nighttime weight. So who knows what I was? Because I was so into like bigorexia at that point that I never weighed myself in the morning because I just knew I didn't want to see that number.
it was a lower weigh in. You couldn't see the 240 or 242. Right?
Something in my head, like the Carl Jung would say, the shadow is telling you like way in the morning because that's probably what.
What year was this?
You're gonna get the best information.
When you were 250, what year was this?
So backtrack. We'll get to the year. But like you guys, I started quite reasonable. Like I didn't really start lifting because I wanted to necessarily change the way I looked. First of all, I wanted to hang out with a buddy. He wanted to spend a summer in the gym. So I was like, all right, like, God, this is a rabbit hole. But yeah, so but I'm glad he took me. I ended up liking lifting weights. But it was mostly from like a sporting sort of perspective because I knew I wanted to play sports the next year. And I remember I just hit puberty so early, compared to my peers, that I remember there's like this big gap physically. Like I remember being this exact same height and I was maybe barely 13, right? So as you see all your peers all of a sudden like creep up, especially my best friend, I remember like he was 4'8" when we graduated middle school. And all of a sudden, like this kid was just like, I'm like, oh shoot, everyone's catching up. I should probably start doing what I need to, whatever I can do to like remain a good athlete. So that was my intention. But very quickly, it was like, whoa, this is way better than any other sport I've played. So there was no weight gain really. If it was natural. It was just, for the most part, my eating habits were more or less the same. But like the recomp was. I can remember a year later, like people who hadn't seen me in a year, they were like just blown away in regards to what the consistent training had done. And that's the key thing, is just be consistent with your training. Like obviously, like get your protein in, but the training itself is such a huge driver for body recompositioning that we tend to forget that. But fast forward, eventually I make a lot of friends that want to compete in like the NPC and eventually the IFBB, and they're all bulking up. They're all about my age, and I'm like, I want to keep up with you guys like one way or another. So if he's 210, I'm 210. If he's 220, well then I have to get to 220, and it just became that game. And eventually, I got to 250, but. In hindsight, it was a really crude way of doing it because I remember taking the weight back down and I was hitting PRs like as I was getting this close to breaking 200. I'm like, oh wow, like my squat just moved up.
So when you're
20
like
pounds.
when you're at 250 when you're lifting, I mean, how was that weight distributed? Would you say it was pretty even distribution, or you carried it a lot more in your glutes, your stomach? Like where was that distribution, and did it impact your ability to train, like leverages, like, if you got a big stomach, then obviously you got to shift movement patterns and things like that. So what was that like back then?
I think most of it was in my glutes and hamstrings and back. I didn't mind the way I looked, like maybe to a fault, but yeah, it definitely impacted performance in a positive way. But pound for pound, like it was very wasteful. It just reminds me of when Eric told Bryce that, hey, yeah, we can move up a weight class if you get the results you think you're going to get by doing that. Bryce moved up a weight class, and the results were tremendous. I didn't get that. I got stronger, but it was definitely a waste of time in hindsight. So yeah. After that, though, like what ended up happening is 2 years later, I found myself competing and going from 250 to 160. I was like, bro, first of all, like that's insane, right? Like in 2005, I was 250 nighttime, whatever, and then under 160 on stage. Then it changed my perspective afterwards, like maybe perhaps in a negative way, where I was afraid to get away from the contest weight because. I saw it as almost being not sports specific in a way, right? But all other sports kind of have that deconditioning period where, hey, they kind of let themselves kind of get away from it so they can work on these other factors that, or variables rather, that at the end will help you become a better athlete it will help you most likely achieve the next level of success, right? So, it's like football players with their track work, their speed work. For me, like, what I needed was muscle, but at the same time, like, having seen myself have to dip down to like the low 160s made me a little paranoid about putting on any body fat almost. Because I'm like, man, that was a waste of time. I don't want to waste like time like that again. Also mentally, I don't know if I want to have to go through another like 40-pound loss, like sort of contest prep. So
what was that stretch? Like going from 240, 250 down to the 160? Was that a straight shot all the way down? Or do you remember like breaking that up into parts?
No, I just did it. I mean, my body didn't want to be that body weight. So I wasn't even weighing in every day. I was just weighing in weekly. So, again, another, like, you're probably too heavy if what your body does when you are distracted for whatever reason is like lose weight. You're probably like heavier or one can argue for, like, or the other side of the coin, you're probably too light if like the slightest distraction in life has it that you gain like weight, right? So I was definitely not in like, I guess, like my physical and behavioral settling point. But yeah, no, I guess what I'm trying to say is I've messed up the gaining game as bad as anyone. And when I tell people that I've had this dreamer bulk, I think that's something they will bring up is that it seems that a lot of people with pretty decent physiques at some point had a dreamer bulk. I don't think that played as big of a factor as people
I was just going to say, dude, I don't think, like I could look back and go, okay, I got to, heaviest I've ever been was 213.
Yeah.
But I don't think getting to 213 was the reason why I got any gains. Like I probably could have made the same amount of gains floating anywhere between 185 to 195.
I just think it was a really bad advice going around. So that whole generation, right? And then the survivor bias on the other side, the guys that, eventually ended up with some good physiques. If you talk to most of them, they've gone through a phase like that. But I think this next generation, we're going to see a lot more responsible gaining, and you're going to see that the results are going to be like virtually the same and maybe potentially better just because, bigger gene pool. But
the end result could be better because you don't have to take off as much weight on the way down.
And people traumatize themselves like with like fat loss phases that are way too long, right? It makes it so that there's just this block to going into that next fat loss phase. So people create a lot of unnecessary trauma for themselves when they do let themselves get like too heavy. So yeah, I mean, I guess like all of us here kind of started out the right way. We didn't really try to gain, I guess, necessarily. Like, right? It just seems like we lifted weights, just kind of kept doing what we were doing and recomped. I think once you do get to...
I think we've all been skewed too. Like as far as we're very successful out the gates. I don't know about Nick, but it was almost like once I got exposure to this gaining thing, it was just all of a sudden it just changed trajectory, not so much for the better. Like almost like, whoa, this went way extreme as far as gaining too much weight. And then it was like, well, I got gains from that, so I thought that's what I should do all the time in off seasons thereafter. And then I would come back down in contest prep aggressively and lose too much. It was almost like I was never in the middle. I was always swinging from one way or to the other. And oftentimes like my excuse would be, well, it's off season. I should be able to spend time with family and have a donut or go have ice cream or whatever. Like you're justifying it through that, or you're justifying it by, well, I made these gains. The reason I made these gains is because I did get up to 210 pounds. That happens a lot. Not just me. I'm sure that happens a lot with a lot of people out there.
Yeah. It almost gives it a purpose behind it. And I think it's important, Jeff, you mentioned just realizing that, I can get similar gains at 185 as I can at 210. that was something that changed my outlook as well. So before my first show, I got up to like 185, between 185 and 190. And I usually step on stage between 140 and 145-ish. So I was up that heavy. And it was just this idea that I didn't know much about competitive bodybuilding, but I knew that from guys at the gym that you should gain and before you start your prep, you should be as heavy as possible because then you're going to cut it all down. So I just ate. I mean, I was having like four slices of bread with just 2 cans of tuna, like still in the circle shape of the tuna can, just smack, like right on the bread, buttered with avocado. And I had this like giant stack. So that was like my lunch. It was like a normal person's day, but just double what a normal person would eat. And that got me to like 185, 190. And then I cut down to 165 and got on stage at 165. And that's 20 pounds heavier than where I should have been. But I didn't realize it until I started competing more and more. And I said, oh, the reason why my quads look different than that guy is not because I didn't squeeze them hard enough on the knee extension. It's because I'm 20 pounds overweight. So then once I actually got into shape for the first time, and granted, I went the opposite direction. So right before I got exposed to 3DMJ and other people like us, I stepped on stage at 128. So I got way down, just classic chasing striated glutes. So I got way, way down. And once I realized what it took to get shredded, I was never going to 185, 190 again. I said, that's just absurd. And then I realized that I didn't have to. I can get the same gains and the same kind of mental recovery and physical recovery at 165 as I can at 185, 190. So I think it's coming to that realization too, is that not only maybe you shouldn't do it, but you also don't have to do it. It's not what it takes to get there.
Hey 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez popping in to let you know all about 5 of our free courses that you can take inside the 3DMJ Vault. For those who don't know, the 3DMJ Vault is our all-in-one video-based education platform for bodybuilders, powerlifters, and serious lifters of all types. It's essentially a place where we house and organize all our best information in hopes of creating our ideal future 3DMJ athlete or future physique or strength competitor. In total, there are over 25 video courses in the Vault, and it continues to grow every year since we started it in 2017. If you want to sign up to be a VIP member, you can make a one-time purchase to access every single one of those courses at any time. But if you're not ready for that just yet, we do have 5 free courses that can help you learn some key concepts and give you a feel for what our courses are like. The first free course most people start with is the Vault Quick Start Guide, which lays out our suggested order of learning for lifters depending on where you are in your training career and what goals you have at any time. The second free course is our most recent release, the Pro Bodybuilder Case Study. And in that one, Coach Brad Loomis walks you through a 3-year contest prep planning arc with one of his pro bodybuilders who also competes in powerlifting. He'll show you progress photos, spreadsheets, and all that good stuff along the way. Thirdly, one of our more popular free video courses is the Recovery Diet. And in it, you'll have Dr. Eric Helms teach you how we have our dieting athletes exit their contest prep phases and return to the off-season in the most efficient manner possible. That one also includes a PDF download and recovery diet calculator made by Coach Brian Miner as well. And our 2 final free Vault courses were each created by one of our 2 team's specialists. We have the Sustainable Fat Loss course by our registered dietitian, Steve Taylor, and the Blood Flow Restriction Training course by our injury reduction and management specialist, Dr. Nick Licamelli. You can become a free Vault member and get all 5 of those free courses by signing up at 3dmjvault.com. Just pick your free course and click Enroll Now to get started. Again, that's 3dmjvault.com to sign up and become a free or VIP member. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the rest of the show.
I did want to ask, so I mentioned my giant sandwich. Alberto, what did a day in the life look like for you at 250?
I'd buy that cheap potato salad and I mix tuna in that. The ones that you see by the deli department in most supermarkets, either that or the macaroni salad. So very functional, despite what most people would think. I was just whatever it took to get the calories in. Like, it wasn't as fun as I guess a lot of folks would assume. I think education was just a little different back then. So I was still having oatmeal in the morning, oddly enough, right? Like, that's way to make life harder. But yeah, you get shredded once and that changes your perspective. Like you're like, all right, there's two sides to the coin. And even if like you're not looking to compete, whatever your body fat goal is, like I think you do have to keep that in mind, is you are kind of deconditioning yourself again for a purpose. You have to keep that in mind, because whatever you might gain during that dreamer bulk, like you can basically shake it all off on the way down. In hindsight, I look at a lot of my aggressive bulking as me being impatient. Like, I thought that I could kind of like force feed myself into muscle growth. And I guess what it kind of encouraged that was the fact that every week I was getting almost every week, I was getting some sort of positive reinforcement from my training, right? Because shoot, if you're gaining, I don't know, close to a pound a week, dude, you're going to be in a different powerlifting weight class, like, 2.5 months later.
Lifts are moving.
Of course you're going to be stronger. So to me, it's like, there's no way this isn't working, because obviously like all my lifts are going up, but one can't really say for sure that it's because your muscles are able to produce more tension, or they're producing more tension. You might just have physics on your side. It might be that like, I don't know, your arm weighs a couple ounces more now compared to a month ago. So yeah, I guess it really just lined up with my level of patience at the time, where, you're young, you're trying to, you're not so much about hearing other people who have, or maybe, because I did have some reasonable voices in my life. They're like, bro, yeah, you probably should gain weight, but it doesn't have to be at that rate. But, I didn't want to listen to that, mostly because the way I was doing it was a lot of fun. Like, virtually every week was a PR, and this was like beyond the third year of lifting. So it's a cheap way of doing it.
Did you guys ever have aspirations of moving up a weight class? Like, I'm thinking back now, and I imagine, like, I was a middleweight when I first competed, and I always thought to myself, if I just have a better off season, I'll compete in the heavyweights. But I became comfortable with the fact that I will likely be a lightweight for majority of my career. Once I realized that, and like the goal wasn't like, if I'm 140 and the bottom of the middleweights is 152 or 154, I am comfortable being a lightweight for the next 2 decades, as long as I'm going to be a natural bodybuilder. Once I became comfortable with that and kind of owned it and was like, yeah, hell yeah, like, I'm going to crush it in the lightweights for my bodybuilding career, and that's just who I am genetically. And once I came to terms with that, I think it was easier for me not to want to push it more and more. Like, the goal isn't to go up a weight class. The goal is to bring your best physique, and whatever the weight is, that's where the chips are going to fall. So did you guys ever have aspirations of like being in a weight class that like you have no business in aspiring to be in?
I think my goal has always been to just be bigger. Like, I wasn't really looking at weight classes like I have to go up a weight class. It's like, I just want to be bigger every time I show up. And eventually what I realized, like, I'm not growing as fast as I would like to. Because obviously, as the years go by, you start to realize, okay, this growth rate is really slowing down. And the last time I really tried to force a growth spurt, I thought I was going to look like Skip LaCour. I'm like, this dude's mopping up shows at the time. He looks dense. I like his physique. He claimed to be natural. I'm like, okay, this is something I can potentially get to. I'm like, I'm going to just go at it this offseason, train harder than I've ever been. That was a mentality. And, about 2 months into it, you realize, yeah, I don't think I'm going to look like Skip LaCour. So the reality hit. It's like, okay, for me to improve, it's not so much getting bigger, it's refining my physique. It's more so like, hey, let me make sure I have a balanced physique. Let me make sure I'm actually getting lean enough, because that's what was holding me back. Looking at my quads, Nick, it wasn't like my quads are fat. It was more like I'm holding water. Like, this is what all the NPC guys used to tell me, Jeff, you're holding water. Well, no, I'm holding body fat. So it's just getting leaner. And once I started to dial things in, I'm all of a sudden like, okay, I'm in contention now for these pro card things in the natural realm. So it's just more about getting the physique dialed in and learning how a trajectory really should be in the off season as you get more advanced. Like in the early years, like we've kind of described, we mess up. We're gaining too much weight because we're eager to get the gains. Ego sometimes gets in the way. Now on the way down, sometimes you're a little too eager as well. You're pushing things too hard. You lose muscle mass. You get shredded, but you lose muscle mass. What you end up learning is like there's a sweet spot where you should be. And as your career advances, that sweet spot seems to kind of get smaller and smaller and smaller. So your gaining phases, they're not as assertive as they used to be, because on the flip side, you gotta lean down again. And you don't want to make that trajectory overly aggressive. So that gets more conservative as well. And that's how over time you slowly get to be more masterful of changing your body composition, where you're enjoying your body composition on the way up and on the way down. And I can tell you guys in my early stages, when I was pushing things too hard on the way up, it wasn't like, yeah, I want to take my shirt off. I was like, I don't want to take my shirt off right now. It looks cool in a t-shirt because I look big. But if I'm at the pool, I don't want to take my shirt off. And then on the flip side, if you over diet, it's like, well, I don't want to take my shirt off because now I look really small and scrawny. I may be shredded, but it's small. So you just learn to find that middle ground. And that's something that I coach a lot, because sometimes you have to explore with people because you don't really know for sure like where their thresholds are. Like how far can they gain without looking too soft and uncomfortable, or where their habits are really not all that great. So you have to explore that a little bit, and you have to be willing to make some mistakes, because that's how you learn where that threshold is at. And the same thing on the way down. So if you were to like put that on a trajectory, like 2 to 3 years of doing that, of some exploring, that eventually you get to a point where you kind of know more or less like, okay, if my competing weight is 170, I should be no more than 185, 190 at this point. Because it makes the work a lot easier on both ends. So that's what, like, as a coach, that's what I've kind of learned. It's more about the big picture setup and structuring timelines and trajectory versus like the minutia within that. Like, where's my calories need to be and those types of things.
What are some other markers that you guys use to determine whether or not someone's on the right path, or whether they have to go more or go less in their off season? So a few things I could think of, like just for myself, like the spices. Jeff, we've talked about this, like the things I'll put on my food. Once I stop like heating up my dinner plate like 3 times, and I'm okay with like eating it just like if it gets a little bit cool, then I must be on my way into the off season. So things like food focus, or what are some other things other than the scale and looking a certain way that maybe you guys focus on with yourselves or with your athletes? And also, like, do you weigh these different things differently? Like, is the scale the ultimate, and then the other things are like more secondary, or do they all like kind of work together?
I guess I as the years go by, I question more and more how much we actually need to bulk. Good evidence of this is if you just look at like powerlifters, like good powerlifters that are constantly progressing. So not necessarily elite, but just folks that are, constantly year after year, the whole progressive overload thing is definitely taking place. What becomes the issue eventually, right? Because they're not allowed to bulk like bodybuilders, right? Is that they're having a hard time staying in a weight class. Like a lot of the powerlifters that I get for like water cuts, like that's the issue. It's like they want to be in this weight class, but they're getting to the point where they're just running out of opportunities. And I'm here to try to extend that. So some of my favorite powerlifters, like the ones that have been able to compete in the same weight class for many years, like you could just see them look different. Like as time goes on, it's like, Taylor Atwood's looking a little more diced than he was like, say, 4 years ago, right? So, okay, but here's the thing with like powerlifting, right? Is that it's really just about those prime movers like getting bigger. Whereas like as bodybuilders, it's a bunch of muscle groups that you're trying to pay the expenses for. So I can see why eating not just at maintenance, but a consistent surplus would be beneficial, especially once you get to the point where your body has more muscle than it just makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint. It's like you're carrying, I don't know, like 20, 30 pounds more muscle than like where you would be like without training. Okay, like things, you have to make your body feel safe. But there's a lot of things that go into that. For example, like what you mentioned, Nick, about like the seasoning. Like I think you're going to see as time goes on, like it's just going to, like that threshold is just going to come, it's just going to become lower and lower. Because that's the thing that I've noticed with my like my newer competitors is like they get into that scarcity mindset like a lot earlier and sooner than like my seasoned vets that understand that sometimes there's a season to eat more, there's a season to eat less, and it all just kind of comes and goes. So to me, I guess the main determinant is like, what can this person handle? Like, of course, I want you to gain in a way that's as lean as possible because it's going to help us out on both ends, right? Not just when we get to the top, you're going to like the way you look at that top end body weight, but then also when we cut down, guess what? It's going to be a lot easier. And then guess what? It's just going to keep on giving because then when we turn it back up and we gain again, mentally you're good and ready to focus on the next goal. So gaining as lean as possible is always the objective, but a lot of that is going to be limited by where the person is maturity-wise, right? Like, are you okay with not necessarily seeing super linear progression in your performance? Because again, like your training is not just a stimulus, but it's a proxy for the rate of adaptation that's taking place. And the rate of adaptation that's usually taking place, it's just most of the time not going to be enough to like quench that greedy part of I guess just not just ambitious bodybuilders have, but I think it's just a very human thing, right? So as lean as I can is the general answer, and this is going to be not just limited by their own natural set point, but how patient they're willing to be. Because I can gain 10 pounds like in the next 3 months if I wanted to. And like, bro, like everything on the training side is going to look like really good. But can I say that's because I've put on muscle, or is that just because I jumped up a weight class?
It's getting people like Nick, it's trying to get people to stay in the pocket as long as possible. Because you like Berto said, you want to get to a point where you still look decent. Like you don't need to be like, okay, I'm looking like Rambo, all these abs and all that, but we don't want to look sloppy either. It's like there should be a middle ground there. So it's like, okay, the visual, are they happy? Is it conducive towards performance and recovery? Are they food focused? Those types of things. Are they managing social settings well? Like from those perspectives, like if that's solid, then if it's a good environment to train in because you're well fed and you're tackling all these things, very good from a habitual standpoint. But it's hard to keep people in that same place because they want this like right now. They want to see the gains now. So they're either wanting to go up in weight, like they feel like they need to be gaining weight all the time in order to create more muscle, which we know is not entirely true. or they're impatient and they're like, no, I just want to cut down because I'm not as lean as I would like too. Like there's that flip side too. So it's getting into holding that pattern for a long period of time. And Leo is a good example. On my bodybuilder Leo, he's super patient when it comes to his off season. Gets his body weight up to that place I was just talking about, and he just sits there and he trains. And his performance continues to escalate because he nudges things correctly in the gym as well. It's like he's not looking for weekly progress. It's more like, okay, we're going to lift and things are going to come more naturally to him. Like it might be a 2.5 kilo jump, you know, maybe it took him 3 months to do it. But repetitively, those numbers are like moving over time. And when it comes time to diet, then he knows, okay, now it's time to diet. And the trajectory on both sides of that, like I mentioned earlier, the reason it's ideal now is because we've explored. We explored going up, we've explored coming down. So he's more or less like the advanced athlete now. But in the early stages, we didn't know like where those thresholds were at. So it's just, I try to stress people to just be patient. And I mean, obviously we've been doing this for a long time. All of us have been training for a very long time now. We know ourselves pretty well. And what I've seen just through the years is you cannot force feed muscle. Like you're going to force feed. You might accrue a little bit, but majority of it's going to be like unwanted body fat.
But see, at the same time, Jeff, Leo, kind of an exception there, like because he's still relatively new to this. Like you know, like when we think of like bodybuilding careers, or maybe I'm just a slow learner.
He's been training about 10 years, or no, he's been training 15 years now.
I'm always getting there. But still, I think fairly mature because, you know, training career, like, dude, it spans decades, right? But I think what you mentioned there is like, okay, you as a coach, you know what his rate of adaptation most likely is at this point. Mm-hmm. And if that is taking place, there probably isn't a reason to like bump up the calories and like eat up the cost of getting fatter, right? But that takes like a lot of like getting real with yourself because for a lot of folks, like their true rate of adaptation is something that makes them, they're like, no, I don't believe this. No. Like, you know, like I can adapt faster. It's like, no, that's just what it is. Like you on the RDL, it's like if we add 4 reps per workout, you know, in 8 weeks, that's really good. That's just not enough for a lot of folks. But I think a guy like Leo, he's perfectly okay with like whatever the rate of adaptation is. Like I trust you, Jeff, to tell me that, okay, that's about what I can expect at this point in my training career. And we'll just marinate in this thing until you say otherwise. So that just takes a lot of maturing because for me, that was my issue is like I couldn't deal with that. And I knew that the easiest way to just break out of this plateau was to like, hey, let me gain 5 pounds in the next like month. Or 2 months rather.
Same. That was just me here in the early days. Let's eat, try to lift heavier.
And it's like you didn't actually gain muscle. Like you just lean on things now and they move. Like it's totally different. So so again, like it takes a real mature athlete to be there. I think for me, maybe if we go back 15 years ago, I probably would have had to do a lot of my bodybuilding like in the 190 weight range, not because I would gain more there, but because the things I could do would keep me a little bit more engaged and entertained, right? Because I know at 190, it's like, okay, I am flicking 150, 140 pound dumbbells for reps. Like I need that, you know, to feel like valuable and like a bodybuilder. And now I can say that, okay, like I'm good. Like I don't need to do no like my bodybuilding doesn't have to be House of Highlights, but it's just rare. But the sooner that an athlete can get there, like the more you are, I guess a part of it is like this goes back to what you said, Nick. It's like, did you ever think you can like eat your way into a new weight class competitively? Like it was. All the clues were there. Like growing up, I was never one of the bigger kids. Like I remember like my stockier buddies, like what was I thinking that at some point, if I get to 250, I could compete at 210 and anyhow. So that's the one thing about Leo that's pretty awesome is like, he knows who he is. He knows what his capabilities are right now. and he's just gonna play this like long game, where like most people like just lose focus, get bored, and like get in their own way.
He is motivated though. He's got a dog in him. He's like,
Oh, he
wants
does.
oh yeah, he's like, I'm gonna get to I want to get to 230. I'm like, yeah, I don't think you need to get to 230.
That's what coach is there for.
No, that really, so before the call, Jeff, we were kind of talking about that, like that phase after prep when things start to get boring and it's like that desert. And that's where people either stay in the pocket, trust the process, or they start another prep to scratch that itch, or they go heavier. And we were kind of talking off air saying that that's why it's good to have other things, like have a dog, have a family, have a job that you're passionate about, because that is going to help with that time period after the high off the prep. And maybe it's not a high, maybe it's a bit of a low. You have this thing that gives you purpose. Every second that you breathe, you are getting in better shape during a prep. So it's like this, I usually compare it to a garden. For some reason that relates to me. And when you plant that garden, you water it and you go to sleep at night, you go to work, you do whatever you do. And you in the back of your mind know stuff's growing in there, no matter what. Like you set the soil, you watered it, you look outside, you see that sunlight, you're like, yeah, baby, like shine down on my garden. I know it's growing even if I'm not there. And then all of a sudden it's gone, right? And prep is over. And now you have to kind of realign your goals. And maybe in the winter, the garden's not growing. But okay, good. Now it's time to get my compost ready. Now it's time to figure out what I'm planting next year. Now it's time to figure out what I did wrong this year. And maybe I could put this plant next to this plant so it doesn't overshadow it next year. And you have to make sure you can kind of step out of that. Almost like I'm going to make a lot of people angry maybe, but like a pregnancy. Because being pregnant, like the woman has a purpose every second of the day. She's growing that baby. And then once it's out, now all of a sudden, she has her hands full with being a new mom, but now she's not this vessel of growth or like productivity or purpose sometimes, some of the feelings that they may feel. I know my wife kind of went through some of that herself. So anyway, my point is that once prep is over, once the fat loss phase is over, how can you stay in the pocket like Leo? How can you manage to not freak out and not try to do something drastic? I think a good strategy would be to have other outlets for that. I think that has helped me over the years for sure.
For me, like in the offseason, what's always kind of kept me engaged in the bodybuilding side of things, like really just all in on it, because there was a stint there maybe a decade or so where people would focus more on, okay, bodybuilding's over, I'm gonna go focus on powerlifting in the off season, or I'm gonna go to this other stuff. Like I was always just super fixated on trying to prove for the next season. I don't know where that comes from, but I think just my personality, like I don't need a lot to keep me focused. Like some people, they're kind of just like all over the place. Like I've always been one to just like really just super focused on a goal. So it's always like when I get off stage, assess what was good, what was bad, those types of things when I need to work on. And then I would be like, okay, now we're just going to go in line. We're going to try to attack these things and get better. I will admit though, once I got a family, like that definitely took a lot of my hyper focus away from bodybuilding, which has been a good thing. It's also been a bad thing though too, because I got too hyper focused on trying to be the perfect dad and perfect husband. And there's been moments where my bodybuilding would slide a little too far down. And then all of a sudden, before I know it, well, I kind of removed some of those good bodybuilding habits. And now I'm maybe eating a little too much or the wrong foods, or now I'm not as active because I'm not doing my morning walks anymore. Then all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, here I am again, close to 200 pounds. So I think there should be kind of a nice balance between those two. Like the way I see it is like I wear different hats throughout the day. Get up in the morning, okay, I'm a dad, make sure my son, my wife, they're all taken care of, they're off to work, they're off to school. Put my coaching hat on, now I'm a coach. Once that's over with, now I'm a bodybuilder. I'm gonna get my training in. Like no matter what, I'm gonna try to get my training in. And then sun comes back. Okay, dad hat's back on. So kind of have to just allocate energies throughout the day. But big picture, trajectory, like I have this on my spreadsheet now that after Worlds, I have a trajectory. I got my map out where I want my body weights. And like right now, I'm kind of creeping towards the high end. I'm like, all right, we got to reel in because I think I've been spending too much time with family eating donuts. Like, okay, let's reel this back in. So that way I'm keeping my goals in line, those big picture goals for 2025. And the last thing I want to do is like to eat myself out of like that experience that I'm going to have with like Berto, Eric, Brad, maybe competing again, Brian. Like I don't want to miss out on that. So I have to kind of ensure that that big picture is still in line.
Yeah, I think in hindsight, one of the big, I mentioned like the photo shoot after a prep to kind of put a nice bow on the whole thing and ease into the off season, knowing that you kind of have that nice little bow. I think early on, I always felt like I didn't accomplish what I wanted to during the prep. So then going into the off season, it was almost like, man, I'm not ready for this. Like I want to keep striving for that pro card or striving for that first place or striving for that top 5. In the movie American Sniper, one of the issues that the main character has is he gets sent home, and it should be a happy moment. Everyone's happy to see him, his wife, his child, and he's just like, there are bad guys out there, and I'm not stopping them. Like I have unfinished business overseas, so I can't be present in this moment. And that's kind of how I felt early on, having like that unfinished business, like not feeling accomplished. And then you're kind of like, well, now I got to go gain weight for 2 years and for 2 years, do it again. So I think, have you guys ever felt that, like depending on how quote unquote successful or accomplished you felt after a prep, was it easier to go into the off season knowing like, man, this was a good season. I did what I wanted to do. I have a lot of things, great memories, great pictures, and I'm ready for my off season versus, man, I really wish I would have gotten that one title or done that one thing, or I don't think I was lean enough, or I don't think I put my best effort in. Now I got to go into the off season and wait for a whole another year or 2 or 3 to do it again. Has that ever been like a factor into your off season?
Yes, but not because of what takes place on the stage. Bodybuilding is just a weird sport to win at. Like, you don't really win like other sports. So, like, you don't go in there and like you impose yourself upon like the other team or the other person. It's like you go up there and a group of people decide whether or not you won. So there's always been this very this chunk missing, like from even winning. Right? Like anytime I've had my name be the last name called, I've always been like, this is awkward. Like, I don't like the attention. It's just weird. So to me, like all the things that, I have unfinished business with, they usually have to do with like, oh, my peak week mistakes. Oh, like my training mistakes, like all that stuff. But it's like the only way I get to correct upon that is like I have to restart this process all over again. So, at the end, because so much of that process is about running the experiment and seeing what happens. Like, I guess all I can really focus on now is like, all right, well, I messed up a lot of things in the off season because surely I had the same sort of perspective where it's like, that's where I got it wrong in the off season. So I get to work on that end. So I guess the game never really stops. And the competitive thing, honestly, I just use it as a driver to get the most out of myself. Like I had to convince myself this last prep to like that I really enjoy the posing. I really enjoy the tanning. I really enjoy the shaving, picking my posing trunks. Like at the end, it's just this experiment that never stops, I guess. So no, I've been more mad at myself, and then it's like, why'd you fuck up the experiment? That's usually how that goes.
For me, Nick, coming off the stage last year, I had a blast. Like, it's funny because I wasn't fully committed to the prep until about 3/4 of the way in. And then once I fully committed, then I was having a blast with it. Enjoyed being up there. Wanted more out of it coming off. I'm like, oh, I'm going to compete again. I felt, because part of it was like, well, I'm getting older. I don't want to have any regrets. I'm running out of time type of deal. And your body has a way of telling you what you should be doing, because your mind will want to do something else, but your body's like, nope, that ain't happening. So having an injury obviously derailed that thought. I'm like, okay, I got to put this on the back burner. And I think same thing can be true. Like when we're training, we should be listening to our body, right? Like our body's going to give us clues of what we should and shouldn't be doing. Same thing with this. And same thing with an off season. Like for me, getting up over 200 pounds and being out of breath, like my body's giving me signals like, hey, you're not doing something right here. So I think sometimes like just we have to listen to maybe instincts sometimes, because it could steer us in the right direction. So getting an injury now in hindsight, kind of a blessing in disguise, because yes, my wife is very supportive of what I do, 100%, all on board, backs me up. But once this one was over and I said I was going to do it again, and when I got injured and had to stop, she's like, okay, good, we get a break. So I think, again, sometimes you just have to listen to your body, listen to people around you, because sometimes those things can steer you in the right direction, whether you're prepping or it's off season or what have you. We covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah, I just hope that people don't take away that I think a bodybuilding prep is the same thing as a pregnancy.
Nah, you're probably going to offend a lot of people out there with that one, right?
I should have stopped at the garden and not gone the step further.
You went a little too far, maybe?
Because honestly, how many farmers am I going to insult versus how many mothers am I going to insult?
I know, but I mean, you got a nice tie on. You're so well mannered. It's hard to get mad at you. I think you're okay. You'll be good.
Be gentle on me, commenters.
Any last parting words, you guys?
I'm looking forward to another off season after this prep. I'm at a point like Jeff, you've talked about, and Alberto, you've talked about, where everything has a purpose, and I 365, I don't feel like I am without a purpose. During prep, the purpose is one way, and the second I step off of that Mr. America stage, I will not want to diet anymore. I know that on my way back to my hotel room, I am a different person with a different path, and going to enjoy the off season. Going to enjoy my new baby in the month after the show, and I am very much a changed person and a changed bodybuilder. A lot, mostly because of, you guys. Like before I was on board as a team member with you guys, and people like us in the space. And also just experience and just realizing what bodybuilding is and what it isn't. So, I am looking forward to continuing this process and learning as I go, and taking it for what it is, because it goes fast, man. I just realized like not too long ago that my prep is more than halfway through, and it's August tomorrow, and this show is in September, and before I know it, like, it's over. So enjoy whatever this tail end of prep has for me, and just kind of, just keep rolling.
Cool. Trajectory, right? It's a football field. You're trying to find the goalpost. Sometimes you're going to throw the ball out of bounds, but you got to learn where you need to kick your field goals at, right? You can't kick 70-yarders. So trajectory, try to stay within line with that. That's all I got. Trajectory-wise, I'm going to go eat now. Thanks for listening, guys.
What's going on, everybody? Eric Helms here, Chief Science Officer of 3DMJ. Thank you for listening to the podcast, and let me just take 1 second to tell you about MASS, Monthly Applications in Strength Sport. This is a monthly research review that I do with Lauren Colenso-Semple, Eric Trexler, as well as Mike Zerdos. These are experts in their field, and we cover all the information relevant to you as an athlete or coach if you're working with strength or physique athletes, or if you're a recreational or competitive athlete yourself. We cover nutrition, training, sports psychology, and health. And we do this in written format, as well as, since you like the podcast, audio summaries, as well as video concept reviews. If you're a trainer, we also have continuing education credits for ACSM, NSCA, NASM, and ACE. So head over to 3dmusclejourney.com, Click on the products tab and you can find us there. I look forward to seeing you and enjoy the podcast.